All right. So, like I said, we're on to chapter 19 and into chapter 20. The reason I thought we could do the two together, there's not a ton of substance in chapter 19 that I think we need to deal with for a terribly long time. We'll talk about it in a second, but C.S. Lewis gets kind of busy speculating. And it's not, none of it's bad, but it's also, you got to take speculation for what it is. It's speculation, and we kind of shrug our shoulders and say, well, maybe, and kind of have to move on with it. But we can talk about that as we go here this morning. So any impressions or reflections or thoughts or ideas that came to you from reading chapter 19 of the book, or chapter 20? If you want to go right ahead to chapter 20, that's fine too. Yeah, so it's still, it's bringing from the previous chapter this idea of love. And remember, we worked our way to what love really is in chapter 18. So in chapter 18, we had been talking about how, well, for Screwtape and Wormwood, they want to make, marriage about that falling in love kind of feeling, right? And attack marriage that way. But then we worked through, well, how does the Bible actually define marriage? And Screwtape and Wormwood, or Screwtape in his letter, actually helps us think about that, where love is where two beings, two entities become one, and each serves the other's need, right? And so marriage is the example of that, where the Bible says the man will leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two will become one. And the love in marriage isn't the feeling of infatuation that they had for each other at the beginning, but is the lifelong serving one another that exists within that marriage. That's love, right? But then we extrapolated that outwards to say, well, that kind of love just isn't in marriage. That kind of love is really who God is himself, right? So just like a marriage is two becoming one, God himself is three in one, right? And like I said, that's one of the most profound insights of this book. This is like, so God is three in one, and there's this mutual service among the persons of the Holy Trinity, so that we can say that God is love, right? Which is what John tells us in 1 John chapter 4. And then that love comes down to us as Jesus makes us one with himself, right? And lays down his life to serve us. His good becomes our good, right? That kind of thing. So in the previous chapter, that was our definition of what love is. Love is when multiple things become one, and there's this serving of one another. And what we find here in chapter 19 is this idea is still being discussed. But what we'll see here is, for Screwtape, as he writes, and we could just ultimately say for the devil and for all of the powers of evil, they are incapable of understanding this love thing, right? It makes no sense to them. That's one of the main things here in chapter 19. Yeah, we'll unpack that a little more in a second. But any other thoughts or reflections from chapter 19? Slubgob. Yeah, is he in chapter? Oh, yes. Yeah, so he's mentioned this Slubgob guy before. He remembers, so C.S. Lewis is making up all of these characters. And C.S. Lewis imagines that there's a school where demons learn how to tempt people, right? And he's invented this character, Slubgob, who's like the headmaster of the school. And so he's saying, you should have learned these things in school under Slubgob, and then and that was in chapter 18. And then he says, and now he's saying, those things I said about him, remember, it was just a joke. I was just joking, right? Because Screwtape seems to be worried that he's going to get in trouble here. Because in chapter 18, when he was writing all that stuff about love, Screwtape kind of said that the enemy, Jesus, actually does love these people, which is true, of course, but according to the teaching of the devil, that's not true, right? So Screwtape's worried that he's stepped out of line here, and he's trying to rewind, get back in line here. Yeah, and that other people had seen his letter and he was going to get in trouble. He's being defensive now. Yeah. All because he was talking about love and talking about how the enemy actually loves these human beings. But the devil says, no, he doesn't. There's got to be something else going on. We'll get to that. Yeah. So good question. Any other? Yeah, and we'll run into this same point ourselves. So Screwtape can't understand this love thing, right? And has to kind of just he tries to work around love. There's got to be some other reason why God, the enemy, Jesus, does all of these things. But it comes back to just he can't reconcile these things in his mind, and so there must be an alternative. Well, we're going to hit a point here today as we discuss chapter 19 where we have to say, we don't understand this either. But do we get around what we can't understand by finding another explanation, or do we just accept what we can't understand and say thanks be to God? Right? Well, when we get to that point, you'll understand a bit more clearly what I mean. But yeah. Any other thoughts or reflections? Okay, then let's dive in here. So the main, or the first idea here in this chapter 19 is that the devil doesn't understand love. It's not a concept he is able to wrap his mind around. So this is on page 100. So this is the second page of chapter 19. Right at the top of the page, but I've added some words in here to make it make sense. So Screwtape says he, or the enemy, is one being. They are distinct from him. Their good cannot be his. All his talk about love must be a disguise for something else. He must have some real motive for creating them and taking so much trouble about them. So, remember what our definition of love was, is that two beings becoming one and living in service towards one another, right? Well, for Screwtape and Wormwood and for the devil and the powers of evil, this is impossible, they think, right? He said, here's what he says here. The enemy, Jesus, is one being. They, human beings like us, are another being. They can't be one. They're separate things. And the good of people can't also be his good. There's no such thing as mutual good. There's just my good or your good or his good or her good. And they're always separate things in the devil's mind, right? In Screwtape's mind. And so he says all of this love stuff is impossible. It can't be real, right? And so, like we said, he's got to try and find another way to explain all of this. And he says all his talk about love, all the stuff that Jesus says about love, must be a disguise for something else. He must have some real motive for creating people. There must be some other reason, and for taking so much trouble about them. What do you think he means when he says so much trouble about them? Dying for them, yeah, like the cross, right? There must be some other reason why Jesus takes all this trouble for these human beings. For Screwtape, it can't be because of love, right? He can't understand love. So Screwtape then, here, the rest of page 100, he takes a little bit of time to describe, at least from his own perspective, what he says happened when Satan fell into evil, right? This is, so from what you read, how does he describe that event here in chapter 19? So this is, this is on page 100. He says, this issue of love, he said, so kind of a third of the way down on page 100, he says, this very problem, not understanding what love is, was the chief cause of our fathers, that's the devil here in this case, our fathers' quarrel with the enemy. When the creation of man was first mooted, and when, even at that stage, the enemy, that's Jesus, freely confessed that he foresaw a certain episode about a cross, our Father very naturally sought an interview and asked for an explanation. The enemy gave no reply except to produce the cock and bull story about disinterested love, which he has been circulating ever since. Okay, so what does Screwtape say the issue was there when Satan fell from being a good angel to becoming an evil being? What does he say the central issue was? About love, right? This whole nonsense about love, right? So he says, when the creation of man was first mooted, so like when God said, as he said in Genesis chapter 1, let us make man in our image, okay? The idea of creating people has been discussed now, okay? And when even at that stage, the enemy freely confessed that he foresaw a certain episode about a cross. So even then, at the creation of human beings, before the fall into sin, there's already in the viewpoint of God the reality of the death and resurrection of Jesus, right? That's actually an important point for us to keep in mind, right? That Jesus dying and rising again wasn't like some plan B that God had to come up with after human beings messed everything up in Genesis chapter 3. God is omniscient, right? God is all-knowing. And so it's not like anything that ever happens in the history of the universe ever surprises or catches God unaware, right? And so everything is planned and everything is according to his purpose, and he knows how all of it's going to go, and he sets history in its courses and in motion anyways. And that's kind of this is what the devil is, according to, and I put this on the screen here. C.S. Lewis is just totally speculating here. None of this is in the Bible, okay? This is why I think we have to only give it so much attention. But he does draw us out some helpful points here that we can talk about, okay? But this is what, according to how C.S. Lewis is kind of speculating about this here, this is what the devil bumps up against. It's how does this make any sense? To create people knowing they're going to do evil and knowing that you're then going to have that you're then going to have to become one of them and die and rise again, right? And to the devil, this doesn't make any sense. And according to what C.S. Lewis is kind of speculating here, this is what caused the rift in heaven at the beginning, right? And see, and so for the devil, the way C.S. Lewis is talking here, there has to be some other reason. There has to be some other explanation. It can't just be this love nonsense. There's got to be some other thing going on here. Now we bump up against the same issue, right? Why in the world did God make people if he knew we were just going to sin, do evil things? There would be all kinds of evil and he would have to come die and rise again and all this kind of stuff. Why did God bother? Right? We can bump up against that very same issue. The question is, do we try to get around it by explaining it in some other way? Or do we just say, well, what God has told us, why did he do that? Because love. Well, why did he make us and know that we were going to do evil and sin? Because love. Why did he send his son? This is John 3:16, right? Why did he send his son? Because he so loved the world, right? We can we can try and find an alternative explanation and explain why God does what he does, or we can take him at his word when he says it's because of love, right? The devil can't take him at his word because it's love, because the devil doesn't think love exists, right? But like I said here, C.S. Lewis is speculating, right? There's very little in the Bible that would tell us about what actually happened when Satan fell away and all of that. There's a couple of places in the Old Testament where people kind of think that maybe it's talking about that. One of them is in Ezekiel Chapter 28. There's this long section that talks about how there's this angel who was there in Eden and all this kind of stuff. And it sounds an awful lot like it's talking about the devil. But then if you read at the beginning, it tells you that it's talking about the king of Tyre. Right? It tells you who it's about and then says all of these things. So it doesn't seem to be about the devil falling, right? And then there's another place in Isaiah chapter 14 where this is where the name Lucifer comes from. It talks about the morning star, which is in Greek was just, or in Hebrew was just the planet Venus, right? The morning star. And then in Latin, when they translated the Bible, it got translated as Lucifer, right? And then it became this name for the devil, right? Which people use sometimes now. But that one, when it talks about how he was proud and arrogant and all these things and fell into evil as a result. But there it tells us that it's talking about the king of Babylon. If you just read the verses around there, it's not about the devil, it's about the king of Babylon. So there's almost nothing in the Bible about what actually happened when the devil became an evil being, which means God hasn't told us anything about it, and means God doesn't want us to worry about it. Right? Sometimes God says, not your business, and you worry about how, you don't need to know how the devil became evil, you need to know how human beings became evil, right? And here's Genesis chapter 3 to tell you that, and that's what's pressing for you, not all the spiritual things that are beyond our comprehension anyway. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 So what Kathleen is talking about, how, this is another way that people try to understand the devil's fall, is that it's jealousy or envy or something like that, because God creates the spiritual beings, but then he goes and creates these physical beings, human beings, in his own image, and gives them dominion over the world and everything he's made. And this is the other point Kathleen is making, is that when we sometimes forget this, we think that, in the hierarchy of things, there's God and then angels and then us. But that's not how the Bible talks. The Bible talks God, human beings, and angels who serve them on God's behalf. Right? And that's an awe-inspiring concept too, when you think about there's these spiritual beings that God has created in order to serve and care for us, especially on a day like Saint Michael and all angels. We're remembering that God does send his holy angels to guard and to protect us, and that they're his servants that he uses to serve us. It is a really awe-inspiring and remarkable thought when you really think about it. Anyways, but the point is that C.S. Lewis, I think, draws us into this discussion about how the devil became an evil being. It's all speculation. We shouldn't pin too much on it, but he does. I like what he helps us to think about love here, right? And how love is this impossible concept for the devil, but by faith, we believe that, yeah, God does this because of love, right? So Screwtape says one more time here that love is impossible. He says, we know, and this is on page 101 now, we know that he cannot really love. Nobody can. It doesn't make sense. If only we could find out what he is really up to, right? There's always got to be another reason. It can't just be love. But for us, we know that that's exactly what it is. It's love. All right. So that kind of deals with that topic here. That's the majority of chapter 19. But then at the end of chapter 19, Screwtape starts to talk about what he calls a desirable marriage for the patient. They've been trying, and we'll deal with this more in just a second, they've been trying to tempt him into inchastity, to maybe have some kind of fling with a woman or something like that, but it hasn't worked. And so now they're thinking, well, maybe if we just get him to marry the right kind of girl, it can have the same effect, right? So this is what he says here. And it all relates to this idea of love still too. So he says, a misguided view of love can be used to steer the patient into a useful marriage, useful for the devil and his purposes. For marriage, though the enemy's invention, God created marriage, it's his thing. For marriage, even though the enemy's invention has its uses, there must be several young women in your patient's neighborhood who would render the Christian life intensely difficult if only you could persuade him to marry one of them, right? So their idea now is that, well, you know, we haven't been able, we've tried all these other things to get him away from being a Christian. They haven't worked so far. What if we find, you know, the right kind of girl and get him to marry her, you know, and maybe she can pull him away from Christianity, right? What do you think Screwtape has in mind when he writes about a desirable marriage? What would Screwtape and Wormwood consider a desirable marriage to be? What do you think they're getting at here? How could they use that to pull him away?
Well, one that has no chance of surviving, if they end up fighting and differing.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. A marriage that's kind of doomed from the beginning, right? Or that's going to be, you know, difficult and painful all the way along. A marriage and those kind of marriages happen because they're founded on the wrong principles, right? That happens when people get married for the wrong reasons. Whatever there's all kinds of reasons that can be the wrong reasons, but we'll talk about some of them here in a little while. That's more chapter 20. Yeah, that's one possibility. Any other ideas? What would make a desirable marriage from Screwtape and Wormwood's perspective? How could they use marriage? Yeah. Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah.
So there would be no depth to that marriage at all.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's especially what's going to come out here in chapter 20, right? He'll start talking about taste, right? The taste in women, right? And trying to get him to marry all according to those external things, right? That create a marriage that's not really founded on real love, but just on not even infatuation then, but just sexual desire, which is not a healthy basis for a marriage, right? Which is why, you know, it's no great huge surprise that so many marriages in the world today don't last any length at all, because a couple of generations of human beings in the Western world now have been taught that that is the foundation of basically everything in life, is sexual desire, and you should make all of your decisions in life based on that, right? That's since 1960s onwards. This has been the idea that's permeated our society, but that's a whole nother issue. Any other ideas for what a desirable marriage would be from Screwtape and Wormwood's perspective? Yeah, at this point, this is like this is what they're, when they talk about, someone, a young woman in the patient's neighborhood who would render the Christian life intensely difficult. I think this is part of it too, the foundational part of it, right? Someone who doesn't share his faith. And so the Bible talks about this, right? Now, this issue isn't as clear cut as we maybe want to make it out to be, right? There's two sides to this coin. So we got two Bible verses we're going to look at here. And the first one here is from 2 Corinthians chapter 6. And this is what Paul says there. He says, do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? Or what fellowship has light with darkness? So he uses the image of like two oxen here that are going to be plowing a field. And the farmer goes and puts the yoke on them, that wooden bar that goes across their shoulders so that they can pull together, right? Now, ideally, and someone at Redeemer was talking about this because they grew up on a farm and they had oxen and they had one that was stronger than the other, I guess. But ideally, both of those oxen need to be of relatively similar strength so that they pull in a straight line, right? Otherwise, if one is weaker than the other, they're going to go sideways like this, or if you only have one, if you yoke an oxen onto a donkey or something like that, two very different animals, right? They're going to be ended up all over the place. And so Paul, his encouragement here is not to be, for human beings, not to unequally yoke ourselves with unbelievers. Now, he's not specifically talking about marriage. Right? He's not saying in marriage, don't be unequally yoked with unbelievers. It's not specific. He's speaking more generally, right? To think about our relationships with other people, right? But I think it especially applies to a marriage, right? If a man and a woman are married, but have extremely different religious beliefs, they're not just going to be like the oxen thing where one is stronger than the other. And so they end up like going off the line or going around in circles. They're going to be pulling in two separate directions, right? The thing is going to be tearing itself apart, right? And so Paul's encouragement here is for Christian folks to find Christian people, right? People who share their values and their beliefs. Now, that doesn't have to apply in every circumstance, not in every relationship in your life. I talked about this at Redeemer yesterday, and I said that, well, it depends on the relationship. For example, with my dentist, I'm in a relationship with my dentist. You could say I'm yoked to my dentist in that relationship. It doesn't matter what my dentist believes, right? His job is to take care of my teeth. Right? And whether he can do that as a Christian or a non-Christian equally well. But then in other relationships, it does start to matter more, right? If you go from my dentist to my doctor, with my doctor, it might matter a little bit more what my doctor believes, especially, about death and dying and things like that. If my doctor is all for assisted suicide and things like that, well, if I'm in that situation, I might not be comfortable with that doctor, although I could probably make it work too, just by telling him what I want. But the closer the relationships get, the more it matters what people believe, right? Earlier in the book, we saw the patient and his friends, right? We're yoked together with our friends, and those friends were leading him astray. Remember that? And then what closer relationship is there than a husband and a wife, right? And so it matters in that relationship more than I think any other relationship, what we actually believe in sharing the same basic faith, right? That being said, like I said, this isn't as clear cut as maybe some would think it is, or we would like it to be. Paul speaks almost in an opposite kind of way in his first letter to the Corinthians. So we read from 2 Corinthians chapter 6. Now we're going to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And this is what Paul says about these kind of marriages where a believer is married to an unbeliever. And this is important. He says, if any woman has a husband who is an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. So much for that all unequally yoked thing, right? She should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made, and he means divorce him because they don't have the same faith, right? He's not talking about other issues here, just over the faith thing. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of his wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean. And by unclean here, he means unholy, okay? But as it is, they're holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved, for God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? That whether they'll come to faith through you? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? Right? Or they'll come to faith through you. So Paul said the thing about don't be unequally yoked, but then here he says, but if you do end up in that situation, right? He's envisioning here a woman, a man and a woman are married, then she becomes a Christian. He's not, okay? And so now they're unequally yoked, right? But he says you shouldn't divorce him because you don't have the same faith, right? Stay together. Why? Because you don't know. He might become a Christian through his relationship with you, right? And then you won't be unequally yoked. And thanks be to God for that, right? He says, but if the husband who's not a believer, if he decides he wants to leave, well, because you've become a Christian, well, then let him go, right? There's nothing you can do about that. You can't make him stay, right? But he's not here so worried about that unequally yoked thing. There's something different going on there too. Thoughts or questions about any of that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. No, it comes with its difficulties, definitely. Yeah. 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 No, and so this is when we talk about what Screwtape and Wormwood think a desirable marriage for the patient would be. I think first and foremost, they're thinking someone who doesn't share his faith. We would get him in one of these unequally yoked relationships and kind of try and lead him astray that way. But I put this other verse here just to show us that, you know, sometimes that does happen and God can work through that too, right? It's going to be difficult. It's going to come with challenges, but we put that in the Lord's hands and let him do his work. Yeah. Okay. That's chapter 19. We'll slide right on into chapter 20 here now. Any thoughts or reflections on chapter 20 from the book? Okay, that's just fine. Yeah, so we continue with this is why I wanted to do them together. We continue with this desirable marriage thing, okay? So we'll and in Screwtape and Wormwood just get more into the details of what they're going to think about in terms of finding a desirable partner for this guy, right? A desirable partner from their perspective, right? A good marriage from the devil's perspective. Any other thoughts or reflections from chapter 20, if you had the chance to read it? All right, well then, the first thing here at the beginning of the chapter, this is just kind of what introduces us back into the other idea again, the desirable marriage thing. The first thing we have here on page 105 is that temptations don't last forever. So Screwtape and Wormwood had been tempting the patient, trying to tempt him into inchastity. Like I said before, I think tempting him to try and get him to have a fling with a woman somewhere, right? But it hasn't worked. And now they can't keep doing that. So this is what he says here, page 105, right at the beginning of the chapter. I note with great displeasure that the enemy has, for the time being, put a forcible end to your direct attacks on the patient's chastity. You ought to have known that he always does in the end. As things are, your man has now discovered the dangerous truth that these attacks don't last forever. So what's happened here is that they've been tempting this guy in this direction, and Jesus has stepped in and stopped it. The enemy has put a forcible end to that line of attack that they were trying to use on the patient. And this is what I'm reading, there's a lot, this is what Paul writes about in 1 Corinthians. I've been noticing that there's a lot in this book that lines up with 1 and 2 Corinthians, but that's another thing. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, this is what Paul says. He says, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. Right? He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. Right? Now, that's not the same thing. Sometimes people like to say, God won't give you more than you can handle. That's not what that says. Right? God will sometimes give you more than you can handle, so you learn to trust him. That's another part of that's 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Anyways, but 1 Corinthians chapter 10 is speaking specifically about temptation. God might give you more difficulty in life than you're capable of handling, but he won't give you more temptation than you're able to deal with. Right? And he'll always, his promise, provide the way of escape. Right? That way of escape is confessing our sins and being forgiven. Always is there, right? And this is what we see happening here in the book. God, Jesus, the enemy, is not letting the patient be tempted beyond his ability. When this has gone too far, he just steps in and stops it. Right? And we've talked about this a few times in the book. The struggle or conflict between God and the forces of evil is not a conflict between two equally strong powers that are wrestling to see who's going to win. It's a conflict between God, who is almighty, and one of his created beings who is not almighty. And so when God says stop, it stops, right? And this is meant to, and this is not just meant to, this is reassuring for us when we're tempted that whatever temptation I'm facing isn't going to last forever. When you're in the middle of being tempted to do something, it feels like this isn't going to go away unless I just give in and do it, right? But what this is putting in front of us is the reality that no, it will go away. You know, whatever I'm being tempted to do, I won't be tempted to do that forever. It will go away eventually, and God will put an end to it when it's time for it to be put an end to, right? And we can trust him on that. Yeah. 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 Yeah, that's how it works with that, right? When that's the foundation of a marriage, that's all there is to it, and that's not going to last forever, right? Yeah, we'll see a little bit more of that as we work through the rest of chapter 20, right? We'll remember that point. You're right on track there, though. Yeah, yep, definitely. All right, so the fact that that's happened, okay, so they've been tempting him to inchastity, to some kind of fling or something, but the enemy has stopped that, won't let them do that. He says, well, now we really got to focus on this desirable marriage thing. If we can't get him into a fling, let's just get him into a marriage that'll work for our purposes. And so they really focus their attention on that idea now. So back to this desirable marriage idea. Screwtape, this is on page 105, still bottom of the page. He says, I would like to give you some hint about the type of woman, I mean the physical type, which he should be encouraged to fall in love with. And so we dealt with just now the Christian or non-Christian thing, but it seems what Screwtape is even more concerned about is the physical stuff, right? And like you just said, Linda, it's more, they want to create a relationship that's founded on lust and nothing else, right? Because there's all kinds of a mess they can make out of that, right? So this is what he goes on to say. This is page 106 now. This question, what men find attractive, basically, or what women find attractive for that matter too. This question is decided for us by spirits far deeper down in the lower archy. Remember, so we think of like a hierarchy going up, right? So the devil, so Screwtape says on the opposite side, there's a lower archy. We talked about the hierarchy before, right? God, human beings, angels, right? Well, in the lower archy, there's powers of evil in a descending order, and lower you go, the more powerful, more evil you'd be talking about. The devil's down there at the bottom. This is all made up stuff, right? It doesn't, but it's interesting. It's kind of fun to think this way, right? This question is decided for us by the spirits far deeper down in the lower archy than you and I. It's the business of these great masters to produce in every age a general misdirection of what may be called sexual taste, right? And so he's saying that in every generation of human beings, there's different ideas about what a man finds beautiful or attractive in a woman, and what a woman finds beautiful or attractive in a man. And he says in every generation, we're always mixing this up to give them the wrong ideas about what they should be looking for or what they're attracted to or something like that. Because every generation, they're trying to create relationships that are founded on the wrong things, that are entirely founded on these physical things, right? So he says, these spiritual powers lower down, they do by working through the small circle of popular artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers who determine the fashionable type. The goal is to guide each sex away, male or female, to guide them away from those members of the other with whom spiritually helpful, happy, and fertile marriages are most likely, right? So he says in every generation, this is what we're trying to do to get people to be into something that's going to create unhealthy marriages, right? And how does he say that they do that? How do they influence people's desires and tastes like that? What did he say? It's back on this one. This they do by working through a small circle of popular artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers who determine the fashionable type, right? Through popular culture, right? A couple of weeks ago, they do have this every year in New York. They have what the Met Gala or whatever it is, and all these celebrities of various types, athletes, movie stars, singers, popular people in general. They show up at the Met Gala in their, in many cases, ridiculous dresses or suits or whatever they're wearing that nobody else in the world would actually ever wear, right? But these are the people that are being set before us as this is what's attractive, this is what's beautiful, this is what human beings are supposed to look like or something like that. And it's all put there in front of us through popular artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers who put this all out in front of us, right? So how do you think various forms of media and stuff like that impact how people think about beauty today? That's one example, like Met Gala things, but how else? Hollywood? Totally crazy clothes, and a bunch of people whose bodies aren't natural human bodies anymore because they've been modified in various ways to keep them from aging, right? And to look in a particular way. They don't eat and they are unhealthy in that kind of way, but they look nice, right? And it's held up as this is what a human being looks like, which isn't real, right? It's fake. It's not real, right? Yeah, how else? Leah?
Social media.
Yes.
Because people can post whatever they want, which means they can look however they want, no matter what's actually happening in the background. So you're not just talking about a physical look at things, but also a perception of life.
Yeah. Yeah. So we live in the selfie generation now, right? Where people, pull out their cell phones and take a selfie of themselves, but they don't do that at their least attractive moments, right? You do that when you've just got yourself all together and you can kind of hide all of the other mess that's going on in your life, right? And everyone takes their pictures of how perfect they look and how their life is, right? And it creates this false perception of what reality is and what is realistic and what's actually possible and all this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. Envy, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think you see this most, like, and I use teenagers as an example all the time, but the effects of this, of the cultural perceptions of beauty and attractiveness and all this kind of stuff, and unrealistic examples that are put before people all the time. You see it most clearly with teenagers. You just have to walk through the hallways of a high school and all the teenage angst that's going on there because their bodies don't look the way that this celebrity's body looks or that celebrity's body looks, and all the distress that's caused in life and the lack of confidence and all this kind of stuff that's going on there, all kinds of problems. So what kind of women, this is back to the book again, what kind of women does Screwtape say that men prefer in that particular age, back in the 1940s? What does he say that what's the taste back then? Anybody notice what he said? It's the bottom. So it's in the age, it says the age of jazz has succeeded the age of waltz. So that's just a music thing. But what does he say? What comes after that? What's the taste in? What do men find desirable in a woman now? Yeah, so that's where he's talking about a previous generation. Then he says the age of jazz has succeeded the age of waltz, and we now teach men to like women whose bodies are scarcely distinguishable from boys, right? So in that generation, he says a woman is attractive who has kind of a boyish appearance to her, not in that she's a male or something like that, but she looks kind of this boyishness to her, right? You think of like jazz, I gotta kind of imagine what that would be like. Anyways, what does he say why is that beneficial for them? Why does Screwtape and Wormwood think that's a good thing? Yeah, it doesn't last, right? No woman is going to be able to look like that for very long because she's not a boy, she's a woman, right? It's just not possible, right? And so he says, since this kind of beauty is even more transient than most, we thus aggregate the female's chronic horror of growing old, right? By creating this false perception of what beauty or what attractiveness is. So we create this, or we aggravate the female's chronic horror of growing old with many excellent results. By getting human beings to find another human being of the opposite sex attractive, not because of just who they are and how God made them, but because of some other idea of beauty or something like that. All kinds of turmoil is created out of this. All kinds of worrying and fretting and and carrying on about how we look and all this kind of stuff.
More interesting. I was talking to someone in my neighborhood, and somebody said to me, my son, you know, like he's got purple here at the moment. And so she told me, like, he's at the moment, like he's kind of attracted to this guy. Which sometimes he's attracted to a woman. And she says, you know, I really like the LGBTQ community because it gives them all, they can love who they want. There's no more of these barriers. I know you're not like that. I know you've got faith and we're very traditional. But she said, really, it's wonderful for our generation, our children to be what they want to be, because in your generation, you couldn't be what you wanted to be. I said, I'm exactly what I want to be, made in the image of God.
Yeah.
And she couldn't understand me at all, so I kind of shut up at that point.
Yeah.
But think about today, how difficult it is for teenagers.
Yes. Yeah.
The temptation there, I mean, they're not going to know all this, they're kind of LGBTQ, put up the flags outside your house,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
the families have done that, 128 families, put the flags up. Because we are relying on LGBTQ lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's even more complicated now because of all these extra dimensions that are added into it. It's no longer what does a man find attractive in a woman. It's all these other avenues of attraction as well that are mixed into that too, that are all deviations from God's design, which is, you know, in the beginning, he created them, male and female, he created them. A man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh, right? So the complication has just gotten further and further since then. Yeah.
I can use the female washroom today because I'm deciding this morning. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to decide to use the male washroom. Then first up with the men, and I go to tell everyone I've met today.
Yeah.
I've heard that from my father, who told me this is what's going on in his son's high school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's all kinds of issues related to that too. Yeah. Leah.
Back to this, the next sentence talks about how, so with the woman not wanting to get a figure and stuff, it also made her less likely to want to have children.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that goes against too what
That's-
God has designed for us.
Yeah. Like God hasn't commanded people to have children, but that's a blessing that he gives to people. And there is a reality in which people are young people our age are less willing to have children now than they ever have been before, right? There's this huge narrative of the world is an overpopulated place, which I'm just got to point out is total nonsense. When you just look at the geography of Canada and how much empty space there is, and you tell me the world is overpopulated, it's not overpopulated. There's plenty of places for people to live. It's a good thing for people to have families and raise children and all that. No one's commanded to do that, but it's a blessing from God. But part of that is because having children upsets the way you maybe want to live your life, right? Because having children is like getting married in that you're no longer just one being now living for your own self. There's another being now who's part of your life. You're in another sense one with them, and your life is now lived serving that other person. And that requires a lot of you. And I think generally speaking, people in the world today are less willing to give that much of themselves to someone else, whether it's in a marriage or to their children, than they used to be. Now, people, this is speaking in really broad strokes, generalities right now. There's a way in which people have children more so now for their own sake than for the sake of their children, right? They have children because they want to have children and they want these kids, and I don't know, it's just different. Yeah. The values of the world have changed on that front. All right, one more. Oh yeah. I've got a whole bunch of stuff left here. Oh well, we'll get through it here. All right, and so he says that's not all. So Screwtape is talking about how they've changed. They alter in every generation what men and women find attractive in each other, right? And how they create problems that way. And then he says, and that's not all. We've engineered a great increase in the license which society allows to the representation of the apparent nude, not the real nude, in art, its exhibition on the stage or the bathing beach. So he says we increase the acceptance of nudity, but not real nudity, fake nudity, right? So that this isn't what actual human beings look like naked, but this is what these idealized, spray tanned, pinched and pulled ladies on the beach look like when you take their picture and put them in the magazine, right? That's not what human beings actually look like, right? But they've created this, and if you think about it, if that was already happening in the 1940s when C.S. Lewis is writing, we live 80 years on now. It's even crazier now, where, you know, and I don't always just harp on cell phones, but a person, all they have to do is pull out their cell phone and have access to all kinds of pictures and images that are, well, this pornographic is essentially it. It's readily available to anyone who wants to find it, and young people know how to find it. If we think we have a marriage problem in the world today, where marriage is in a rough spot, 20 years from now is going to be a lot worse, right? Because we've got a whole generation of kids now who are growing up with, and this is the problem with the pornography thing, is it's not just that it's readily available. It's in a lot of places it's encouraged as a natural and healthy thing for people to do, you know, like as if it's a reasonable curiosity, and that's why they go and find this stuff. Because in the world today, whatever your heart desires can't be wrong. And so if your heart desires that, you should just go do it. That's how it works, which is craziness. But in 20 years, we're going to have an even huger marriage problem, where all of these false expectations about what marriage is, what sex is, what all of these things actually are, have been created by what people have found online and how they've come to understand these things. It's going to be a mess. Yeah, I don't mean to, discourage everyone, but that's what I look forward to dealing with in 20 to something years. Yeah.
We watched a whole series on life in London with teenagers. The stuff get up to, like Peter watched the end of it, I couldn't even watch it. I mean, the depravity is unbelievable. And I said to Peter, does that really happen? He said, yes, these are really unreal stories going on in the city of London today. I mean, such depravity, I'd be able to express it.
Yeah.
I think it's normal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not talking about it.
Yeah. And so Screwtape goes on here, and he kind of makes this point too. He says, as a result of this increased acceptance of nudity, now in the world today, pornography, we are more and more directing the desires of men to something which does not exist, right? The view of a woman that's not realistic and not actually out there. Making the role, this is where it talks about the lust idea in all of this, making the role of the I in sexuality more and more important, and at the same time making its demands more and more impossible, right? Making love and attraction all about what I see and what I like, and making the expectations of what I see and what I like more and more unrealistic all the time. It just amazes me. C.S. Lewis is writing about this in the 1940s. The guy is like looking into the future here, and is showing us exactly what we're dealing with 80 years down the road. Like, it's amazing. Yeah. And disturbing at the same time. Yeah. All right. So this is basically what we've said already. Based on what we've read, what do you think Screwtape considers a desirable marriage partner for the patient to be? Well, we said someone who's not a Christian, right? That was the first thing we dealt with earlier. But also someone whoever just meets his expectations of what he desires, right? A relationship that's built on lust and nothing else, right? And knowing that that's going to fade, that's not going to last, desires are going to change, and the marriage will just blow up anyways, right? That's what he wants to do. And then this is what we were just talking about. If C.S. Lewis, writing in the 1940s, could say that the increase in license and nudity was causing problems in his day, how much more true is that today? It's crazy. Yeah.
How do we counter that? Like,
because you see these problems even in Christian marriages.
Yeah,
So how do you guard yourself against that? How do you help your loved ones around you guard against it?
against what? Which part?
All of it.
All of it. Oh, how much time do you got? I think
the
just
influence of our perception of reality, like
yeah.
the reality that God has in store for us is very different than the reality that's put forth in the world today. And it influences everybody, like even in Christian marriages.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think a big part of it is by talking about these things, right? And realizing that, well, by talking about what God's design for marriage is, right? By having the conversation we had last week, what is love, right? What is love in a marriage? What is marriage? What holds a marriage together, right? By having those conversations, and by having conversations about what God's design for marriage actually is. We're not going to solve this problem by shaming young people for accessing pornography. It's a sinful thing. It's wrong, but shaming them for it's not going to fix it, right? It's just going to drive them deeper into it. The key with young people is to help them see that what they're seeing there isn't real. And when you drive that point home, hopefully, it becomes less desirable when it's not real. When this is all fake, when we all can accept that none of this is realistic, this is not any of that, it already becomes less desirable on that sense. But then also that this isn't God's design for any of this, right? That this isn't love. This isn't what marriage looks like. This isn't what a woman looks like, right? This is all a propped up fake version of reality. Yeah.
That's very tough because Leah has a point. I mean, now every single child from age 3 on up has an iPhone. They can have pornography. Watching this, I found that out from a teacher the other night. He told me that in his classroom, the kids are all watching the little pornographic scenes, and he's trying to teach them mathematics. He walks around and says, "Give me a phone," and I won't. I have my right to have my phone here.
Yeah.
He just does the stuff.
Yeah.
They learn nothing. You can't learn about it because they're just don't get in.
Yeah.
They're very rebellious. This is all normal to them.
Yeah.
It's normal.
Yeah.
It's a crisis.
Well, I know this in terms of young moms not even young moms in general, on getting so caught up in fitness and health, and not that those things are bad.
But why? Yeah.
But why are they doing it? Are they doing it for an image?
Yeah.
And I'll admit I've struggled with it, and I consider myself a healthy, strong Christian, but I struggle with that because this is the world reality that's with us right now.
And so then the other thing that helps us is to read what God actually says about these things, which is the last thing I've got for us here today. Proverbs chapter 31 is what we're looking for. We're gonna need to look this up. So we've talked about all these other things that the world throws out there as what's desirable in what does a man find desirable in a woman, and what does a woman find desirable in a man, and all these different kinds of things. If you're looking for Proverbs, it comes right after Psalms, by the way. Psalms, Proverbs. Psalms is the biggest book in the Bible, so it's the easiest one to find. If you hit Isaiah, you went too far. There you go. Yep. But God gives us in his word here a picture of, well, what is, and now just what we get here is a picture of what a desirable woman is for a man. This is the direction this goes. We're reading from the book of Proverbs, which is written by King Solomon, and he's writing to give wisdom to young men, right? So it's not that we're writing about women here to the exclusion of men or something like that. There is an opposite that goes the other way, but it's not here in the Bible. But Solomon in the book of Proverbs is writing to young men to impart wisdom to them. And this is right at the end of the book. He gives them the last bit of wisdom. Well, is what does a good wife look like? Oh yeah, well, but this is early in Solomon's life before a lot of that has happened. So Solomon doesn't follow his own advice necessarily, right? Which is just that's a whole nother problem. But what Solomon says here, this is just, I think this is amazing. I think what you have here, this isn't. So a wife, what does a desirable marriage partner look like? In this case, from a male perspective, looking for a woman to whom to be married. This isn't what you're expecting to find when people don't think this is what the Bible says, right? People think, well, the Bible's going to tell you to find, a woman who stays at home and doesn't do anything. That's not what it says here, right? This is. I think this is just an amazing little bit of the Bible. I'll just read what it says. This is very long. So I'm going to read verse 10 down to verse 31 here. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still dark. She provides food for her family and portions out for her servants, or for her servant girls. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for her tasks. She sees that her trading is profitable and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand, she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. Instead of scarlet there, it could probably actually mean something like warm clothing. The fact that they're wearing red isn't going to help them when it's snowing, but except for visibility. But sometimes these Hebrew words aren't the easiest things to translate. So it probably means more like she has warm clothing for her family. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the reward she has earned, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. Well, there's all kinds of things in there. What stands out to you about what Solomon says there about?
I read it, but she does. She doesn't need the husband,
Oh, sure. This is not a woman who sits at home and waits for her husband to do everything. That's for sure. Yeah. Now this is Solomon's like ideal woman, right? Now it doesn't mean they actually exist, right? He married 700. Yeah.
What I like about this is how it ends. Because
Yeah.
as you were reading it, I'm like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm terrible at that. I struggle with idleness, blah, 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 blah. But then at the very end, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. That is the cap of it all. So really everything else is just her personality.
Yeah.
And then all of that, the only reason it matters is because she's somebody who fears the Lord.
Yeah. That's ultimately what it comes down. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, right? So Solomon says to young men here, don't worry about their looks. That doesn't matter, right? That beauty is fleeting, that'll go away. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. What I also like here, where is it here? Verse 25, she is clothed with strength, right? This is not how people necessarily think, right? It's not how people think. This is not what people expect the Bible to say about women, right? But here it is. She is clothed with strength and dignity, clothing, right? Instead of, fancy clothes or something like that. She's clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come, right? Because she's got faith. Right? Well, remember earlier in the book, we talked about how the devil wants us to live in the past or worrying about the future. And Jesus wants us to live in the present with an eye on eternity, right? She's doing that. And so she's not worried about the future. She's able to laugh about what's to come because she knows that the Lord has good in store for her, right?
But now I think beauty is also more than seen.
Yeah, that's what they're saying here. Yeah, yeah.
Personality and how you are.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
a beautiful thing.
Yeah, yeah. Anyways, it's all these things. It's not meant to say, oh, every woman needs to do all of these things, just like no man could do all of these things either. Nobody can do all of this stuff. But Solomon is sitting here before young men, all these other characteristics other than what they look like, or prestige, or honor, or like popularity or something like that, or fashion or any of that. It's how they love and care for their family. It's how they take care of children, or how they love their husband, or how their husband loves them, or and most of all, as Leah pointed out there at the end, the faith that they have in their Lord Jesus, right? That is the main thing. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. That's the end of it there. Thoughts or questions about any of that?
I think that all of those things that a woman does with her family and that is showing the love and living the love.
Yeah.
Because we don't do it all the time.
No.
We're all idle at times.
Sure.
But I think if you compile all the things we do over our lifetime, or even over a week, the little things that just are automatic.
Yeah.
And it's not just wives, but the husband
Yeah, sure.
does the same.
Yeah.
There are things that we all do that shows our love without saying those words all the time. Whereas our young people think that when someone tells you they love you, that's true.
Yeah.
But you have to show that you love.
Yeah, but there are different ways of showing love, right? Not everybody shows love in the same kinds of way.
No, that's
Yeah.
right. But
Yeah.
all the things that you do show that.
Yeah.
It's not only just your family, children, and your husband, but there's your parents, there's your your outside family, your cousins, your brothers, sisters, whoever,
Yeah.
church people,
Yeah.
your friends, like it just goes on and on.
Yeah. And what that scripture there puts in front of us is that all of these things matter more than what a person looks like, right? How they love one another, how they care for other people. Like it talks about, giving to the poor, right? These things matter more than what the person looks like. The devil wants to put in front of us in every generation that what matters in love and in marriage is attractiveness and beauty. And that's just a marriage built on wrong principles that's never going to last, right? Instead, a desirable marriage partner, as the Bible lays it out for us, is somebody who, first of all, fears the Lord, loves and serves the Lord, and loves and serves other people. Now, they're not going to do that perfectly. Like, we're all sinful people. We're all going to fail at that. But that's why we fear the Lord, because we know in him there's love. We go, with you there is forgiveness. Therefore you are feared, right? We fear and love God because he forgives our sins, right? So no, we're not going to perfectly do all of this, but these are the things that make a person a desirable partner for marriage rather than physical characteristics, attractiveness or something like that. Even charm. It says charm is deceptive. They might be a very charming person at first, but that might not last forever either, right? Don't build a marriage on how charming the person might be, you know, all that kind of stuff. Thoughts or questions? Anything else? Okay, that's all I have for today. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, out of love, you created us and you sent your Son to be our Savior. We pray that you would create in our hearts love for one another, love in husbands for wives, love in wives for their husbands, and love in us for all people. Cause us to show that love in works of mercy, in caring for one another, and in sharing the good that we have with all those around us. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Before Kathy goes, can we